Well, little title for this one, What a Difference a Day Makes. This is a song from former days for the 24 little hours. And certainly 24 little hours made a massive difference to thousands of people, possibly hundreds of thousands of people in this chapter and the chapter that follows. And this morning we looked at the dedication of the temple that Solomon built, and I mentioned of the 3 occasions that the temple is the central point in the book of Chronicles. We find that with Solomon, at his dedication, I found that it's the most planned. Very intricate details that went into it. It was there planned by his dad, inspired by the Holy Spirit. We're told by the scriptures that that was the case. It's not just my thoughts on it. And so we looked at that this morning when they opened the temple. Here we have the account for Hezekiah, where he opened the doors of the temple. They'd been shut, and it was the most sudden of all the events of the events surrounding the temple. Certainly, they were taken by surprise at what God did in such a short time. Following week, next week, God willing, we'll look at the most fought for occasion. And that's when Josiah again opened up the temple of the Lord. And some of the battles that he had that we can read of in the book of Jeremiah and also in the Chronicles itself, because of the time period it took for him to achieve some things that Hezekiah was able to achieve in about a fortnight. Absolutely amazing, the difference it makes. Hezekiah, now part of the reason for that is that things were far, far worse in Josiah's day. Things were far, far worse. But the other thing was this, he was a 16-year-old young man when he began to seek the Lord. And people don't move at the behest of a 16-year-old, whether he's king or not. You know, people talk about the royal household and they're going to make changes and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. If you notice, there's very little change in many of the areas. I'm a royalist in actual fact, but there's very little change in the areas. People come in with their great ideas and they're going to do this and they're going to do that, especially those coming into the family, and you find that the family remains the same anyhow. People don't move like that, and there's a 16-year-old boy that's going to try and make some changes when we look at him next week. With Hezekiah, we know nothing of his conversion at all. We know that his mother's name was Abi, or Abijah. And she was the daughter of a man called Zechariah, who earlier in the book we are told had understanding in visions and dreams. I wonder what influence Grandad had on his grandson. I wonder what influence Mom had on her son. It must have been a great disappointment for Samuel when his sons didn't turn out to be what he was. But we find that one of his grandsons sat on his knee, and his name was here recorded, Heman. Great musical director, and he dandled him on his knee, and he must have been a tremendous influence for him. But for Hezekiah, we know nothing of his conversion. There are some conversions that we can read in depth about. Paul's conversion recounted nearly 4 times in the book of Acts. But here with Hezekiah, the curtain is drawn. It's as if we're not permitted to have a little look at it. But one thing we do know about him is that before he became king, age 25, he had made the decisions in his heart to do what he was going to do. We sing that song, don't we? Or we've sung that song. I have decided to follow Jesus. There's no turning back. And so we find with Hezekiah that he was a man that made his decision for Christ. And as soon as he came through to that position of becoming king, we find that the decisions have already been made. I say that Solomon's temple is the most planned. I wonder what plans went on in Hezekiah's life. What plans he had. What plans did you have when you were 25 years of age? What plans did you have for the future of when you would get to a certain point? Hezekiah, with the goodness of God shining upon his soul, made plans. And his plans was to forge a way ahead to make changes amongst his people. I think it was, I forget which one of the mothers it was, but used to look down into the cot and hold her son's hand and say, only God knows what changes you will make in this world. And he became the life changer for so many people. I forget who it was now, but I remember reading it in the life story. This we do know about Hezekiah. In the verse 2 of this chapter, we're told that he did according to all that his father David had done. That's the measuring stick for all the kings in the book of Chronicles. All the kings are measured. How do they compare to David? He did according to all that his father David had done. Later on in the chapters, we come to chapter 31. Towards the end of the chapter, it says this: whatever Hezekiah did, he did with all of his heart. That's a lovely little trait, isn't it? Whether it be in the service of the house of God, or whether it be in the law or the commandment, he did it with all of his heart. He was sold out for God. Absolutely gone hook, line, and sinker for the passionate walk that he had with Christ. Well, let's have a little look at it. What would you do? My mother always used to give me May the 6th off. It was in school. I'd always have May the 6th off. There was the one day I didn't have to, I was a terror for Mitchin in one period in senior school, in grammar school, but I didn't have to worry about May the 6th because she would let me have it off. But, and I don't, what plans did you make for your birthday? Sometimes they work out, don't they? My 60th birthday, my 40th birthday, turned out to be disasters. But you made plans for them, didn't it? Turned out to be, nothing wrong with you planning, it was my planning, wasn't it, Joe? Just make that straight. Just picked up on that. But they made disasters. Look at what it says in verse 3. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. Psalm 122 says this about a pilgrim that has been invited from a far land. If you started in the pilgrim journey from Psalm 120, he's coming from a far land where he has opposition and those that undermine him. From the tents of Meshach, I think it calls, or from Meshach, and the tents of, I forget, Sheba, I think it is, one of the others. But he's coming from far, and as he comes into the hills of Judea, he looks up and he says, I will lift mine eyes into the hills, from whence comes my help. Now we know that God doesn't dwell in the hills or the mountains, and yet in fact in the Old Testament he did. Because Jerusalem is up in the hills. It's not down on a plain. It's up in the hills. Unusual for the capital to be up in the hills. And there it's cited. And then in Psalm 122, it says this: I was glad. You see, somebody had invited him to come along from a long, long distance away. Somebody said, why don't you come to the house of the Lord? And as he enters into Jerusalem, he says this: I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. If he had gone on this day, he would have been disappointed, for the doors were shut. The doors were shut. And so, in the first year, in the first month, it says concerning Hezekiah, he opened the doors of the house. Talked about Solomon this morning, didn't we? About how when he prayed, he didn't put his hands together and eyes closed with furrowed brow and whitened knuckles. He spread forth his hands before the Lord and knelt down upon his knees. He was so open to God. And here we have a man who is open to God. The emphasis of these chapters with Hezekiah is not necessarily about the presence of God as it was this morning with Solomon. It's not about the spirit of worship, though worship is there. It's not about the spirit of prayer, though we find that with Hezekiah, that he was a man that prayed. It's about this, a man that is committed to the Lord. That's what it's about. And if our work is going to prosper, we need that spirit of worship. We need that spirit of prayer. We need that unchanging word of God, but we need a people committed to it. And that's what this part is about. It's about a man that's committed and wants to draw people along with him. It says this in the Song of Solomon, beautiful words, draw me and we will run after you. It's a wonderful way of putting it. Draw me and we will run after you. So we find with this brother, his decision was made before this day and decided to follow Jesus. Verse 3 says, in the first month, in the first year of his reign, those doors were opened. Verses 5 to 12 says, he spoke to the Levites. In a later chapter, it says about Hezekiah, he had this ability. He spoke to the hearts of the people. Saul, on one occasion, had this ability, Saul the king, but he lost it. And he said on one occasion about some threats that he had made, and his own men that had stood so close to him over the years literally turned around and said, do whatever you want to do. They'd had enough. But Hezekiah had this wonderful ability of speaking into the heart. And so it says simply, hear me, you Levites, hear me. Then in verse 12 it says, and the Levites arose. They'd been sitting around for years with nothing to do, doing jobs that they were not called to do so that their families could survive in the climate that they were living in. They would survive by the giving of the people. And if there was no temple open, then there would be nothing to give to. And so these Levites, who had been sitting around, suddenly hears a voice of a man that has committed his life to Christ and says to them, hear me now. And upon hearing their words, his words, they arise. They stand up. And immediately he sends them. I think it says in verse 12, I think it is around about verse 12, they went into the temple. His instruction was this, to clean out the house of God, to clean it up. And they went in. Verse 17 says this, they began on the first day of the first month of the first year, and they finished it on the 16th day. Just over a fortnight. That's what it took. Just over a fortnight to clean out the temple. It's interesting, isn't it, that it's on the first day, as soon as he becomes king. As soon as he becomes king. He has this driven within his soul, the house of the Lord must be opened, and he spoke to a group of people that were willing to follow him right the way through. He spoke to them, they arose, they went in, and they finished the work 16 days later. What a wonderful change can be wrought there. But then in verse 20 it says this, he rose early, so that's the 17th day. You see the momentum? In the rugby yesterday, all the pundits were saying, well, one team has the momentum, this other team has the momentum. At some point it's going to break. And so they talked about momentum, didn't they? Momentum was with Hezekiah. He was not going to stop here. It wasn't enough for the temple to be cleansed. He rose early. That's the 17th day. And he went and called for the elders of the city, that they might go up to the house of the Lord. I mentioned it last night when I was up in Bedlin. Gwyn Davis was telling me that when he was, what's the foreman underground? What's he called? Huh? What's the foreman underground called? You got the fireman, is it? Overman, that's it. Gwyn was an overman. He was actually there on the day of Aberfan. You can see him on the film, actually. If you ever see the old film of Aberfan, you see Gwyn walking up as one of the overman miners, one of the supervisors that went up to help with the children there. But he was telling me of a job that sounds a strange old job. But it was for the miners. And this was the title of the job, a knocker-upper. A knocker-upper. Now, if you go to some Welsh villages, if you notice, they're just straight lines. If you notice that, the terrace, My mate lives up in Aberdare, just to the left-hand side in Aberdare. And it's the strangest village, but it's a knocker-uppers they like to go there. Because it's at road level, and all you do is just go from house to house where you know who lives where and what shift is on which, especially the morning shift, and you knock them up. A knocker-upper. Apparently, Brian Spacey was a knocker-upper for the British Railways. When he was living up in Rumley, that was his first job. Within the British Railway was a knocker-upper for the train drivers. He went through the village and into the upper end of the valley to knock people up, to get them ready for work. Knocker-upper. I wonder if Hezekiah had a knocker-upper. When he went to the houses and called for the elders of the church, or elders of the city, and they went up to the house of the Lord. Stirrings going on. His heart burning. This house is open. Let's make use of it. Some of the things that went in them. When they went up, it says they offered both sin offering and the burnt offering for all Israel. You see, Israel at that time had been divided. There was Israel, the northern tribes, and the southern tribes in the south, which they called Judah. But notice here what he does. He's a man with a big heart. He's a man with a big heart, this one. He's very driven, yes. He's very committed. But he's not so blinkered that he can't remember people. He has no favorites. He has only one wish, that the people of God might join with him in the house of God. That's his sole desire. And so he calls upon the elders of the church, and they go up, and the Levites and the priests go up with him. And in the common assembly that was gathered there, they offered sin offerings and burnt offerings for all of Israel, that they might enjoy the presence of God. Verse 27 says this: when the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord also began. So all the assembly worshipped. The singers sang, the trumpeters sounded, and the king and all with him bowed and worshipped. That's what I meant in one sense. The common denominator in all three occasions is the worship that counts. A worship that goes on. But notice this: when the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord began. And it talks then of they did not begin to worship until the burnt offering was finished. Now, what did they use for a burnt offering then? Because this was not something. I was talking to someone the other day. We had a joint of topside, and I read a recipe for cooking beef topside of the weight that I had. Put it in the oven. We're doing the different things. Put it on a number 5, and you can keep it in there for 55 minutes, and it'll be cooked. So we tried it. It was actually spot on. Don't believe it. Normally our beef is like leather, and that's not Judith's fault now. That's again now. But we always struggle with beef. 55 minutes of singing. No, it's more than 55 minutes. Because if you read it, there were bulls that were slaughtered for the sin offering. They sang for hours. Sang for hours, they did. When the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord also began. And they sang, and they sang, and they sang. What I find fascinating, that the 1904 revival in the valleys of Wales was known as a singing revival, where they would sing for hours. A sermon might be based upon a hymn, a verse within a hymn. That started around about November 1904. By December, now this is what I can't work out. By December 1904, they'd already become aware of the revival in Wales, in India. And the same things were happening there. They would gather in meetings like this, and they would literally sing, "Here is love, vast as the ocean. over and over and over again. Margaret mentioned that tune, the chorus of the tune that we sing with it, was running through her head the other day and she just couldn't shake it from her. These were so given to song. As they came in, they would, as the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord also began. And it led to this, that the king and all that were with him worshipped. Now you would think that would be enough. You think, well, we've got what we wanted. Is it enough that every seat here is filled every Sunday, both morn and evening, and even that we had 10 up on the gallery? Is it enough? No, it's not enough. We could so easily be contented with every seat being full, but it's not enough. And so this man, who has the city now, the whole assembly of Jerusalem is gathered within the court in the house of God here. There are thousands there. Is he satisfied? No, he's not satisfied. Because chapter 30 verse 1 says this: Hezekiah sent letters to all Israel and to Judah, that they might come to the house of God to keep Passover. Now the problem was, that's okay, don't worry. He's looking to reach out to both Israel and Judah. Samuel was the first Methodist circuit riding preacher. Did you know that? Samuel had 3 places where he would go, constantly, back and forth, all the time. Read the account in 1 Samuel, it's quite clear what he was doing. He had 3 areas that he would visit from his home base in Ramah, and he would go to 2 other places. He was a circuit riding preacher. But Hezekiah is the first tracker that we come across in the Old Testament. He sends out letters to all in Israel and Judah, that they might come to the house of the Lord and to celebrate Passover. But there was a problem. Passover had already passed. If you notice, Passover is on the 14th day of the first month. They began to cleanse the temple on the first day of the month, and it wasn't cleansed until the 16th day of the month. It's already gone. But you see, God had made provision. In the Old Testament, in the book of Moses, he said, listen now, if you're not fit to take it then, I'll give you the second month, the 14th day of the second month. So, Hezekiah sends out all these letters. He sends runners, trackers, that they will go out and up to the north of the country, to the east of the country, to the west of the country, and send letters to all that were in the boundaries of the land of Israel, that they might come and keep Passover. It says that some of them mocked. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were telling me how they made efforts to speak about their faith, and they were mocked. They were laughed at, they were jeered at, and there was a little bit of the butt end of a joke. But it says that some mocked, but others from Asher, from Ephraim, from Manasseh, from Zebulun, and from Issachar, they came. And later on in the chapter it says, a great many people came to that Passover feast, so that the writer was able to pen these words: there had not been a day like this since the days of Solomon. This started when a man made his decision to follow the Lord Jesus. And in his decision to follow him, he was going to bring others with them, not forcing them, but speaking to their hearts. If you read the letter that he sent to the children of Israel, don't be like your fathers. Don't be stuck in a rut now. Don't just think that those days are far, far gone. There's a way open for each and every one of us. His letter is so inviting. It's not threatening at all. He's saying, if you come, do you realize if you come, those that have been taken captive from your lands by the Assyrians, they will be shown mercy. So winsome in his way of speaking to people. See, it's hard to write a letter, isn't it? It's hard to write a letter. You write a letter and you crack a joke, you're probably going to get something back to you. And sometimes it's not always pleasant coming back because they can't see your face, they can't hear your voice, and they can't see your body language when you're talking to them. You're putting it on paper. And so we have to be very, very careful. Some of these Victorians and those before had tremendous ability to write letters, to pen a letter that could win a heart that is grieving and mourning and in such darkness that a letter could lift them up. So could Hezekiah. It says back in chapter 29, verse 31, how he interprets this worship that he's led. He turns and says to them, now you have given yourselves to the Lord, come near. Bring sacrifices and thank offerings. So as many as were of a willing heart brought them. This worship that we speak of here in both Solomon is now interpreted for us in how it shows itself. You have come with a willing heart. That's what worship is. Worship is about an open, willing heart committed to him. It's not about someone being dragged here and by the scruff of his neck or scruff of her neck brought in and made to do something. There's a willingness of heart. It says this in the Psalms, in closing, my final verse. Your people shall be willing in the day of your power. They shall volunteer in the day of your power. That's what that word willing means there. They shall volunteer. Here, these people have come, and they've come willingly with sacrifices to give unto the Lord, and they're now following him like Hezekiah did. What a character he is. Have you given your heart to the Lord? Have you been drawn to that place where you are able to come and say, I am coming, Lord, coming now to you. I've decided to follow Jesus and I'm not turning back. Come with us to this river. Bring your burdens and let the mercies of God's word wash them all away, that you might follow him now and be one of his servants. Hezekiah. What's the thing that stands out with him? The commitment that is so prominent there. An open door leads to an open heart, and an open heart leads to an open door. Have we wondered why perhaps God hasn't given us opportunity sometimes? Could it be that we haven't got an open heart before he can give us an open door? A door of opportunity. May God grant it to us in these days.